They're about saving lives. And they're about helping the people that put their lives on the line for us every day, in their everyday job. So although it's disappointing that you can't watch your movie on your iPad, these guys are really in a pickle if they can't communicate with the outside world. Okay, so now we're going to talk about public safety radio and codes, building codes that support it, and its distributed antenna system. My name is Bob Butchko, as previously announced, and I'd like to introduce the members of our group up here. Seth Bueckley is the CEO or the president of a company called Solid Technologies that makes the active components of a DAS. They've entered the marketplace 5 or 6 years ago. They certainly have very solid products, and they're doing very well, and he's certainly an expert in this field. And then Alex Coleman is a VP at Verizon. He's in charge of the public sector, and he's also in charge of their efforts in the public safety space. And although there is a huge component here of being able to communicate using land mobile radios, there's also a new and emerging component where the critical information that these first responders need, maps, designs, drawings of buildings, various kinds of instructions about how to save somebody's life to an EMT, all these applications are going to be provided via the LTE, both in a private and a public systems. And then Chris's last name, excuse me for a second here, Chris Nolte from Telecom, what's the company? Tempest, I'm sorry, Tempest Telecom is here also because Chris has done an awful lot of installations and certainly knows the ins and outs of both passive systems and active systems and so forth, and he's going to explain that to you as we go forward. So an industry update that I'm going to give, some real world issues that Chris is going to talk about. Seth will talk about this shared infrastructure. There's a real controversy as to whether or not public safety systems should be on the cellular DAS that's in a building or not. And then next generation of public safety communications that Alex is going to address. So for those who are hearing about public safety for the first time, and I'm sure there's quite a few people in the audience that are, this is really the first responder's lifeline. And the first bidirectional amplifiers and DAS systems that were sold were sold into the mining industry back in the late 70s, to where miners needed to communicate emergency situations and just basically communicate inside the mines. They had DAS, they have lots of radiax cable and various broadband BDAs and so forth. Then the first code, the first public safety radio code, that regulations that a municipality put into effect for all new buildings in their city was Burbank in 1991. And then of course we had the great wake-up call of 9/11, where emerged from there were two concepts. One was interoperability. The boroughs couldn't talk to each other. They all had their land mobile radios. They're all talking to their own guys, but they can't talk to the other guys. And the other thing was the in-building public safety radio systems either were non-existent or were wiped out, and they couldn't talk to the people inside the buildings. So that led to even greater disaster than we could ever imagine, obviously. The next line there says, the new reliance on land mobile radios necessitates in-building amplification. If one of my college professors says, just remember one thing out of this hour I'm going to talk to you about. Just remember one thing, okay? This is the one thing. The one thing is that 10 years ago, when you went to an accident scene or you went to a fire, the on-scene commander had a land mobile radio, and maybe several of his lieutenants, maybe a couple of the lieutenants that were out there trying to fight this fire, he's talking to them, trying to direct the action. Well, today, mostly by code and mostly by regulation, almost every firefighter on the scene has got a land mobile radio. So what's happened is that the land mobile radio has gone from becoming sort of a status, I'm of higher rank than you are because I have a land mobile radio, to being a critical part of the equipment that first responders use. And it's not only, it's as, you know, if you gave a policeman, you know, the right to carry the gun or right to carry a land mobile radio, he probably would go with the radio because he knows he can get help. So it's very critical, and everyone's using them, and that's why it's so important to make sure that they can use them anytime, any place, anywhere, inside any structure. All this code started in the large cities, and the codes themselves have spread actually from the west to the east. The west is fairly far ahead of the East Coast in the implementation of these public safety in-building codes. The requirements, especially on the East Coast, kind of vary county to county, but the saving grace. The trends also in public safety are that the ability to actually put public safety on the cell phone DAS and have a cohabitation there is going to be a reality someday. The purists always want to keep those two separate, and Seth and I will have arguments about that later. And then the street-ready applications, the ability to bring some data via LTE technologies and so forth to those same responders is certainly a trend that's going to grow, and is certainly very, very important. Up until very recently, all the codes that the municipalities have put into effect are kind of like roll your own. You know, they've consistently kept trying to reinvent the wheel. They were technically not very accurate, sometimes legally suspect. The state would say something and a municipality would say something else. They're always open to interpretation. And the municipalities themselves really lack the resources to do the enforcement, although the intent was certainly there. So now we've got national in-building codes that make it very easy to reference. They're created by an accepted authority. They are robust and very comprehensive, technically accurate. They're legally defensible, and they're easy to reference. And all a municipality needs to do today, like for example, Montgomery County, where I'm from in Maryland, Montgomery County, Maryland has a very excellent code. And all they have to do, since they're an NFPA state, is just simply reference the NFPA code. So oily rags, for example, in the fire codes, NFPA XYZ. Electrical outlets, NFPA so-and-so. You know, in-building public safety radio, they have a code that now they can reference. That will accelerate the various municipalities putting in codes, which is, you know, we're definitely where we want to go. Lastly, and just to show you the difference between a good local code and the national code, the local codes are in blue. The national codes are in red. So you can see if you went down through the NFPA code and covered every one of their sections and their directives, the local code only does a couple of them, or only does probably about 10% of what actually can be covered. So the importance here is to have effective codes that are in place, that are defensible, that people that are enforceable, and then hold the vendors like ourselves to, you know, a very high standard to make sure that the first responders can communicate once they get inside these buildings. So that's a little bit of background, a little bit of update. Seth, you want to take over now?
All right. Well, thank you for your participation as an audience. It's great to see so many people here. I want to commend Tracy for stepping it up as an organization and really outreaching the in-building community as well as the outdoor DAS community. This is shaping up to be a fine event. So you may be here wondering, why do I care about public safety? And I will say it doesn't matter if you care about public safety, because public safety cares about you. Public safety cares about the DAS space. And whether we like it or not, public safety is a reality that we're going to have to deal with and work around. And so my mission in this particular presentation was to pull it off with as few slides as possible. And And I'm going to leave you with one image and one thought that hopefully will supplant what Bob tried to put in your brain. We'll see how well I do. I'm going to use pictures, he used words, so I think my chances are pretty good. So I want to talk a little bit about public safety, just a couple high-level events and things that have happened. Bob did a good job of kind of setting the framework. So obviously the events of 9/11 obviated the problem. The problem is primarily two. We didn't have interoperability amongst the radio systems that were being utilized, and we didn't have sufficient in-building coverage. The public safety community has kind of had a chip on its shoulder ever since then. It's feeling like, you know, this was a prime example of where we did not get, the public safety community did not get the kind of support from the government that they needed to be able to deliver their services properly. And it cost other people their lives. And so the way that they exerted themselves was in the area of code development. It's already been mentioned, Jack Daniels recently passed, Jack Daniel. He was instrumental and worked for some 14 years to get codes in place with the IFC and the NFPA. Well, codes just sit on a shelf until they are adopted by a local municipality. Once they are adopted by a local municipality, then the mechanisms around timing, around enforcement, around everything. Basically, it becomes law when brought into the local level. So there are hundreds and hundreds of municipalities all around the country that are considering and in the process of adopting public safety codes that require reliable in-building coverage. And so the codes kind of became a tool that was developed by the public safety community to get what it is that they deem necessary. Well, the problem is the public safety community is broke. The public safety community does not generally have sufficient funding to do what they need to have done in the in-building environment. So there's always looking for who's going to pay for this. And this is an important concept because when everybody is chasing the building owner around putting in-building coverage into the building, what's happening is the burden of paying for public safety radio is falling to the building owners, and it's also falling to the wireless operators. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And so the codes are very specific. I was reading Oregon's code on the way over here yesterday, and it says things like, you know, if there's no outdoor coverage, you don't have to improve the indoor coverage. But we do want indoor coverage if it's over 5 stories tall, if there's underground, anything underground, if it's over 50,000 square feet, or if the fire marshal wants it. And then who's responsible for that? They put the burden squarely on the building owner. I mean, it is an unfunded mandate in its purest form. And then when shall it be done? It shall be done within a reasonable time, which is negotiated. And how should, you know, what should the system be? You know, it has some very specific requirements that the active equipment be in a NEMA, weatherproof, you know, enclosure, that there's a certain amount of battery backup power. And there's variations of the specific language that each municipality adopts. But the basic form of it is they need to be weatherproof, it needs to be ruggedized, it needs to be able to withstand an incident. If there's a fire and we come in and start spraying stuff, it needs to withstand. So if the codes were the nail that the public safety community invented, the recent award of the D-Block 700 megahertz for public safety is the hammer that is going to drive these codes out into the marketplace. Because what is the point of giving 20 megahertz of prime 700 spectrum to the public safety community without having in-building coverage where it works? And so there's going to be a lot of momentum, a lot of energy put into thinking about how do we not just build this nationwide public safety network, but how do we make sure that it provides in-building coverage where most incidents are going to happen? So the building owners, just a quick note of how I see them transitioning with this whole concept of DAS and wireless. CL, corporate liable. Corporations used to pay for phones and give them to their employees. Well, ever since the iPhone came out, everybody decided that it's no longer a phone, it's a personal friend. And I'm taking it home with me. you know, the bring your own device is all the rage. What we're finding next is building owners are asking themselves, all right, I know now I'm moving more and more towards the cloud. What does that look like? And the short answer is we're moving away from a copper-based infrastructure to a fiber-based infrastructure. Because in order to get these smart devices access to the cloud, the latencies have to come down. The only way the latencies can come down is through fiber-based architecture. And so what we're finding is more and more building owners are thinking about an all-optic fiber network using passive optical networking. PON is a word that you're going to hear thrown out more and more. So along comes the cellular operator, and traditionally the cellular operators on the left have focused on discrete systems up until the last, say, 5-6 years ago. Pretty much for the most part it was, I'm going to do my own thing on my own schedule, my own way. It put the poor building owner in the position of having to navigate through 3 or 4 different relationships that might be upgrading the DAS at 3 or 4 different times. And so the environment we're in now, I would say it's mixed. There's a certain amount of carriers just doing their own thing, and then there's a certain amount of venues, more and more so. Enterprise is saying, I'm going to invest in DAS because it's important to me, and yes, I want to make sure that the carriers are accommodated, but it's really around meeting my own needs. And then there's even some carriers who have started to say, well, I'll put DASs out there and I'll share them with my competitors. Obviously, there's a lot to be sorted out. We believe that because of the transition to the cloud, because of the pressure that's going to be on building owners to comply with the public safety requirements, it's going to become more and more obvious that the most efficient DAS systems are the DAS systems that are managed by a single party, that share the fiber optic elements, and that can accommodate everything that that building owner needs. We have to think in terms of what the building owner needs because ultimately it's their real estate. They have the trump card on who does what inside their building, and as they're squeezed by the public safety community and they're squeezed by their own constituents and tenants to deliver more and more with the DAS, I believe that the building owners are going to pay much more attention than they ever have to the topic of DAS. They didn't even know what DAS was 5 years ago. Now they know what DAS is, and they're starting to become educated and have expectations around DAS. So you'll never read this slide, but all you really need to pay attention to is that red section. So this is the 700 upper and lower. Everything in blue is what the carriers own, primarily AT&T and Verizon. And you can see the dark red is the 20 megahertz of spectrum that has just been awarded to the public safety community. By way of sequence, what they've done is they've awarded the spectrum. They're setting up a new organization that will be called FirstNet that reports to the NTIA. This was a law that was passed on February 22nd. The first order of business was that the FCC appointed an interoperability committee, which is going to make recommendations to FirstNet on how this should come down. I think there's 9 or 10 members of that committee. Alcatel, Harris, Motorola have representatives, and then there's a cross-section of industry people on that panel. And then ultimately, they're going to figure out how to fund and roll out this system. The big debate is whether this will be a federal system that local municipalities access, or whether this will be a bunch of local systems that with federal oversight. And so there's a real debate that's happening that will unfold over the next couple years before us. $7 billion has been allocated. $30 billion is what's estimated to build the network. My question for this room is, who's going to pay for the in-building? And my suspicion is it's going to be more building owners, it's going to be more operators being asked to write that check because the public safety community, again, struggles for funding. So we've taken the lead at Solid, and I have a vested interest. I spent lots of money and lots of time, we did, innovating a product designed specifically to meet the building owner requirements, solving the lower band public safety frequencies, but also accommodating each of the operators' requirements. So when you hear about public safety frequencies, one thing we have to remember is, California is an example. Every fire department in California, except for 3, uses public safety frequencies that are either VHF, which is 150 megahertz, or UHF, say 300 megahertz, up to to 1 gigahertz. So these are not public safety frequencies that traditionally relate to cellular bands. So yes, there are public safety frequencies in the 700 and 800, but there's a ton, I would say the majority of the existing frequencies are in these lower bands. And so having innovated a product to meet those requirements and meet the code, because we built our product after the codes were public, I have a vested interest in making sure people understand, yes, this can be done and it can be done well. So the problems, public safety community we've articulated. They don't have funding, but they do have codes. The building owner is being pushed by the local municipalities and also by their own constituents to improve wireless coverage. And the carriers are now being pushed by building owners to say, hey, listen, I know you want to serve my venue, but I have a public safety requirement either because it's being enforced upon me by the authority having jurisdiction or because we're embracing this as a best practice. And furthermore, as we know, carriers cannot charge for data that they can't deliver. The obstacles. There's 4 primary obstacles that the industry has historically wrestled with. The first is a technical obstacle, saying, oh, these systems can't work together. I can assure you, through dozens and dozens of examples, that through proper filtering and proper management and proper implementation by a top-notch integrator like Lord & Company or Tempest Telecom, these systems can be rolled out and managed without a hitch. The other issue, and probably the bigger issue, is liability. Operators simply don't want to take the liability, and I would argue it's perceived liability, but nevertheless it's liability, around owning a public safety DAS. The last piece is, why should I have to pay for something that, a public safety DAS, when I'm a commercial operator? And at the end of the day, who's going to take care of this? Because most codes say that there's got to be annual inspections, there's got to be certifications. And my real quick response to that is we have formed a coalition to focus on these specific efforts of educating the community on these practical matters. And we have answers to each of those. And I want to specifically zero in on this issue of liability. The way that a carrier can be protected from liability isn't through necessarily lawyers. Lawyers don't lead the business. Leaders lead the business. The way that operators can be protected is by pointing out that whatever DAS they built was built to industry standards. And one of the things that we're finding is you take a hard look at our industry, there really aren't industry standards. There aren't certifications of what a good DAS is, of what a good engineer is, and who's authorized to certify a DAS as being compliant with the public safety and the operator requirements. And so our Public Safety Shared DAS Coalition, and yes, I'm looking for a shorter, better name, stay tuned for that, is focused on 3 areas. We have 3 goals. One is we want to increase the awareness in the industry around this topic and what should be done about it. The second is we're going to continue to roll out improvements on the code language that can be adopted at the local level. We're going to give the local municipalities more ways of monitoring and managing who has public safety DASs within their jurisdiction and making sure that that's being done in a way that's cohesive. And the last piece is we're focusing on the area of certification. Some of you may have heard about the SciBet initiative in June. Solid is a sponsor of that because we believe that the more technicians that are trained up around the basics of DAS and even some of the higher level thinking around DAS, the better off we will be. We also believe that there needs to be a new standard set for who's authorized to inspect and certify a public safety and a commercial DAS. When you read the codes now, they have language in them that makes no sense. It may say things like, must be certified by an FCC technician. And a DAS expert recently wrote into one of the public safety magazines and he says, you know, a DAS engineer being required to hold an FCC operator's license is like a surgeon being required to keep a first aid card. And I thought that's a great statement because the FCC certifications and other certifications that have existed don't really mean anything in our DAS industry. And so it's incumbent upon us to create the certifications that do mean something. And the outcome of all of this is that buildings will be safer. And so, fundamentally, here's the image and here's the question and here's the one thing. Should public safety be treated as a hitchhiker to be feared? Or should public safety be brought in as a carpooler who happens to be going to our shared destination? Thank you.
There will be some heated debate over all that. Yes, us purists will come out and refute a couple of the things that my good friend Seth has said. So we'll get to that. Stand by. Alex Coleman from Verizon.
Bob, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, you can do better than that now. Good afternoon, everybody. Good, good. You're not asleep yet, are you? All right, my comments my brief comments this afternoon will really touch upon some of the solution sets that, I guess I have to turn the slide here.
Zach.
Should be right there. But some of my comments today will touch upon some of the solution sets that we have built and delivered to the marketplace and are building to deliver to the marketplace in calendar year 2012. So a lot of what I'll talk about truly is reality in terms of some of the things that we talk to customers about day in and day out. Part of my responsibilities from a public sector standpoint, while they include overarching public sector, both federal, state, and local education, I have taken on a holistic responsibility for public safety. So that would include business development strategy and actually sales of solutions to many of the first responder communities across the country. And so I'll get into a lot of discussions around 911, next-gen 911, and of course what we are doing from a wireless perspective, leveraging our 4G LTE network that my colleague Scott spoke of a little earlier, in terms of building out that infrastructure, not only support the needs from a general consumer standpoint, but what we're doing also to support the needs of public safety. I think as Bob mentioned at the outset of the discussion, we are really seeing, particularly the public safety arena, transition from what I'll classify as really a voice-centric really environment, LMR environment, to really more of a data-intensive environment. And we actually have been seeing this transition occur for many years as we've worked with the first responder community to equip police cars and squad cars with RE video broadband service, equipped to Panasonic talkbooks in squad cars, in ambulances and things of that nature. We're beginning to see the transition even to tablets, particularly if you think about it from a healthcare perspective. Beginning to see that migration over time where the first responder community can get better access to information that would afford and help them respond to a crisis in a very timely manner. And so it's really no surprise to us that that continue and really take advantage and leverage all that we're doing, again, from a 4G LTE network. And I think they are attempting to get the slides up, so I'm going to give you 1 second. Okay. Give you 1 second there. Okay. All right. While they're looking for the slides, I'm not going to belabor the point. I think Mike did a good job in really outlining a lot of the recent developments that have taken place, at the national and federal level with the reallocation of D-Block, the fact that there will be a new entity established, more of a governance standpoint, that funding is available, and there's various rules and regulations that are being established in accordance with the infrastructure, whether or not public safety will have sole rights, if you will, to the infrastructure, or whether or not you'll see other more commercial networks like education and others takes advantage of the infrastructure as well. So while those debates goes on, I think we all know the public safety community needs services, needs next generation capabilities and services, and so ourselves, along with some key partners that are very focused on the public safety community, again, are bringing about some of this relevant change to this very, very important market segment. As part of this new legislation that has recently come about, I think you'll see that there are really 3 different scenarios and I wish I had the slide, but I'm just going to talk to it for the essence of time. 3 different scenarios that I think could materialize really coming out of this national effort. You're going to see what I would classify as either national or state-based mixed networks, which really will combine both cores and RAN, both independent of one another, that will be used for both public safety and non-public safety purposes, although public safety would in fact have the priority in that network scenario. The second scenario would be, again, either a national or state-based first responder network, which the core and RAN networks, core and RAN networks would be independent, but the sole purpose of the infrastructure would be limited to the first responder community only. And then lastly, I think you'll see, again, a national public safety core, a state RAN, and essentially this national core would be dedicated to public safety, and then you would have various state-based RANs and other networks really home running off of that national or core network that would have both primary and secondary uses, taking advantage of not only private 700 megahertz networks, but also commercial networks, much like we provide in the marketplace today. I think what you'll find, though, is a series of mixed deployment, much like we're seeing today. As I mentioned before, we've been seeing the first responder community take advantage of our commercial network services, and quite honestly, we don't see that stopping anytime soon. So I think the mixed use networks will be something that will be very, very important to the public safety community as we go forward. This is really a graphical representation of what we think the networks could look like. This by no means is representative of what Verizon is doing or investing in, but certainly ideas that we've tossed around in some of our strategy discussions where, again, if there is a national core network that's built, how you would have both private and public networks hanging off of that. You would have seamless roaming. And interoperability certainly is going to be the key here between the national core as well as our private infrastructure. And then states who elect to opt out, which I do believe that most of your major metropolitan cities and large state governments will elect to opt out, will actually have their state-run and managed networks as well that potentially would plug into not only the national core, but also the commercial infrastructure. Next slide, please, if you guys are controlling the slides there. So, again, all this is going to take a lot of time, as I think we all know. I spent countless hours at the FCC. I actually was part of the PSAC committee that was set up to study and analyze what we want to do from a national perspective. And so, while at least the first step in terms of reallocation of the spectrum is taking place, it is going to take some time for governance and networks to be formed. So, to that end, we certainly applaud the efforts of the FCC. But I think we all know, and what was mentioned earlier, the public safety community is in need of services that certainly take advantage of our commercial infrastructure as we go forward, but leveraging the current investment of LMR. And so to that end, we about a year ago, actually announced a very, very important alliance to take advantage of some of the emerging private builds that were taking place really across the country. And we, along with our partners Motorola and Ericsson, have been responding to numerous RFPs as a result of those private builds, and happy to report that we've had some early success. And so, again, we're not waiting for that national infrastructure, but I think all that we're doing will play certainly in to that national infrastructure should and if it takes place. And so the capabilities, again, we feel are somewhat unique. We certainly want to combine the legacy and heritage certainly that we have, the market presence that Motorola has, and certainly the technical expertise from a 4G LTE standpoint that Ericsson brings to the table. Really want to combine those into these next generation networks and capabilities, and really have the foundation be a 4G LTE network, although ensuring that from an interoperability standpoint, these networks can certainly scale up or scale down, meaning they can work off of 1X, 2G, 3G services, not just regionally, but also nationally, and potentially internationally as the networks become more connected. Obviously, benefits that we see from a customer standpoint is that these networks we hope are very flexible, somewhat future-proof in that they take advantage of the latest technology, but again are a mix of both private and public and or commercial infrastructures as we go forward. Certainly we attempt our best to well coordinate these build-outs, advise our customers of the latest technology that is coming down the pike, but more importantly it extends that advanced or extended coverage that our first responder community desperately needs. Next slide. Again, as I mentioned earlier, some of the additional benefits and capabilities that the alliance with Motorola and Ericsson certainly provide. Again, in the core of what we do, Verizon Wireless does not build and manage private infrastructure for customers, much in the way that we historically would think of it from a traditional wireline network perspective. So we actually leverage our relationship with Motorola from a private network build-out standpoint in coordination with our state and local government customers. Obviously taking advantage of our commercial 4G spectrum, providing some level of QoS, and more importantly, ensuring that the commercial networks as well as the private networks integrate with existing LMR networks, and I'll touch on that a little bit later in the presentation. So from a go-to-market model perspective, given that some of the BTOP money certainly is running out and these private networks are very expensive to fund and manage from an ongoing perspective, we certainly invite a lot of public safety customers to take advantage of the merits of what we're building out from a commercial 4G standpoint and the interoperability that exists both from a suburban and rural perspective in accordance with the wireless networks that are out there today. So again, that private to public interoperability, we'll have devices that will seamlessly roam within this infrastructure, and again, we'll have service capability not in just one geographic area, but we can certainly take advantage of what we're doing on a national basis. Next slide. So just a couple of things that we are building in accordance with this overarching public safety network solution. Again, we will have priority service as a part of our network evolution. It is not preemption, but we will allow the public safety community to have a higher class of service as a part of the network build-out. As I mentioned before, we'll have that seamless interoperable roaming between the commercial as well as the private LTE infrastructure. Roaming will be bidirectional, and we'll offer a form of what we call enhanced roaming to our customers as we go forward. And then last but not least, we will have devices that are interoperable in this environment, which we think is incredibly important to our customers. Again, that can scale not only from a 4G standpoint, but down to 1X. The first vehicular modem was actually released last November, and we'll have our first smartphone as a part of the alliance that will be released in July of this year. So again, we think we'll have the full complement of some of the services that our first responder community will need. Next slide. One other element that we're making a part of the overall solution set that we think is vitally important to the public safety community is what we call site sharing, which I term as kind of a glorified name for hosting. I mean, we will open up our cell towers and provide space available to the public safety community for essentially hosting. And so we'll provide shelter, we'll provide land space, backup power, air conditioning, backhaul easement, so that again is a part of the overall offering, particularly for hosting either cores or commercial RAN should they need it as a part of our overall infrastructure. And so as we kind of conclude the comments, again, we think it's vitally important that whatever we do as part of the commercial and private infrastructure, that they do integrate into the existing LMR system. So those investments have been made, and our public safety customers just cannot afford at this time to do wholesale upgrades to those infrastructures. And so the thought process as we entered into the alliance with Motorola and Ericsson is that everything we do has to integrate. And so to that end, again, we invite customers to join on our 3G infrastructure, take advantage of what we're doing from a 4G LTE standpoint, whether it be leveraging our commercial network solely or the private network build, but more importantly, integrating into the existing P25 or LMR systems that exist today. We think it's only right as a part of the solution set that we have. Next slide. And so lastly, I just wanted to do just a very quick summation. All that we're doing from a network infrastructure standpoint is complemented by a variety of things that we've taken on across the business within Verizon, and specifically Verizon Wireless. We announced a number of years ago an effort called Open Development. So we work with best-of-breed OEM partners to gain access to our network, whereby if in fact we didn't resell a device, you would still be allowed to operate on our network. And so we've got hundreds of devices that are currently going through Open Development that can be made available to not only the general public, but also to the first responder community. Also, we have a joint innovation lab, which we actually invite our customers in to the joint innovation lab to do some joint testing, whether it be on applications, network support, things of that nature. Public safety will also be a part of this critical lab environment, lab testing as we go forward. In phase, which is our what we call machine-to-machine initiative. So machines talking to machines, transferring of mission-critical data. We think this is a vital part not only of what we're doing from a commercial standpoint, but also from a public safety standpoint. So if you think about some of the things that our first responder community are taking on today, it'd be valuable if some of that information could be transmitted in a machine-to-machine fashion. So we've got an entire organization, actually a joint venture with Qualcomm, that we have set up that is focused on the needs from a public safety standpoint, driving machine-to-machine solutions. And then last but not least, you've got to be able to showcase and demonstrate how all the technology works, how it all comes together for our customers. And so we've got our innovation centers. We've got one center based in the San Francisco Bay Area that's really more focused on application development, and then one up in New England, specifically the Boston, Waltham, Massachusetts area, really focused on kind of hardware integration. And so those two centers, and as well as all the resources I've pointed out here, will be available as part of our public safety solution set in an attempt to ensure that we promote interoperability, we promote the use of our 4G infrastructure, but more importantly, that we've got our public safety community armed and ready with the latest and greatest technology. So Bob, thank you.
Chris, I'm aligned to it first. I'm terribly sorry about that, but would you mind come up and give us a few comments?
As Bob said, my name is Chris Nolte. I'm with Tempest Telecom. Tempest is a full turnkey DAS integrator. We have in-house engineers, technicians, to fully integrate single carrier to neutral host installations. Fun part about doing this kind of thing is you get to meet a lot of different people and hear experts in the field that, you know, you get to learn a lot of new things. Basically what I'm going to go over is kind of the compliance process, passive systems, active systems, and some case studies we've seen. I'm going to try to keep it short because, you know, I think we're getting a little close on time. Basically, for our compliance process, you know, we get notification from the facility that they would like to have public safety installed. Sometimes this isn't by their choice. It's being handed down, like we were talking about, from the municipalities and from the state level. So initially what we'll do is we'll go out and do a site survey, propagation, mapping, equipment specifications. We'll come down to the bill of materials, do some CAD drawings, get the design, installation drawings, finalize those construction drawings, and then go for the approval, implementation, sign off, and acceptance. You know, it sounds like a quick process. It sometimes can be, you know, 3 to 6 months if you're lucky. You know, typical passive DAS has you know, over-the-air antennas on the roof, has a BDA down on the head ends, MDF level, which makes it a lot easier to power it with some of these requirements of a 24-hour backup, which, you know, also needs to be need before rated to supply for the water if it gets doused with water. The other option is active DAS, which Seth went into a little bit, and you've seen all day, is, you know, a fiber-based system with remote modules, different floors, rebroadcasting these frequencies. With this type of infrastructure, keeping a 24-hour uptime is a lot more tricky, because now you have to distribute a lot more battery backups that are NEMA 4 rated. Here's an example of a DAS we designed, I believe it's in Arizona. You know, we did our propagation modeling to see where we're at. We went out, did our CW testing to make sure the model matches our predicted output. And then, you know, moving through our next submittals are going to go through and actually start installation. One of our case studies, Seth had actually brought up about Oregon State, how they have some to no regulations, and they leave it up to the actual owner of the facility. So what we ended up doing is working with Oregon State Hospital, coming up with a solution to cover their in-building and their campus and their tunnels. One of the kind of the tricky things about a mental hospital is you want to make sure you hold on to your badge. Because you ever try to convince somebody that you're not a patient if you lose your badge? We actually had that happen at a facility, so it can add a couple hours to everybody's day. But anyways, everything worked out. He was able to leave. But anyways, yeah. Also, too, is you know, working with the carriers to coordinate access, acceptance testing after the system has been installed and up and running, and also making sure you don't have any kind of passive intermodulation between the different carriers with all the different frequencies being mixed into these systems. Another kind of interesting thing that's been coming up with some of these higher-end condo facilities is they don't realize there's a requirement to cover a public safety system, and that's where the education process comes in, and we start educating them on the requirements needed to cover, you know, the fire, the police bands, and all the other public safety radios. And then it also kind of leads into, you know, selling them on a neutral host carrier, or maybe just for back of house for their employees. Let's see. I just wanted to try and keep it nice and short, and if you guys have any questions, kind of keep it open for Q&A for everybody here.
Any questions? Hope not, because I have a whole bunch of them. We can just wait just about. I'm sorry, in the back, did you have a question, sir? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I actually have one question,
Okay.
and that is to whoever's actually doing the deployments for the public safety community. Will the future public safety networks become part of the GET system as it stands now, or could they be rolled into it? Or would there be someone able to advocate that they become part of GET so that maybe it would be more viable to the communities that they're used in? Okay. GETs being the governmental emergency telecommunication systems.
Okay. Well, I think what you mean by GETs is that almost every municipality or county in the country has got their own emergency communication system, right? Is that what you're referring to, ma'am?
This is more a national program.
Okay.
And if they're in GETs, and they would have certain qualifications and certain priorities,
Right.
so that those networks would be given priority resources and stuff in the communities that our first responders would in fact
Sure,
have
sure.
services that they need over the network and power, so that
Yeah.
something would happen.
But that exists inside the municipal repeater systems today. It does not?
Verizon, with wireless priority system interfaces.
Yes, yeah. You know, I think, to answer to your question, I think there is a possibility that type of scenario might exist. if and when the private networks do in fact become part of the overall makeup from a data perspective. So when I talked about the national network that's being formed or some of these statewide infrastructures that are currently being built out, I could see a scenario by which those could become part of kind of a GETS-like infrastructure. Probably not in the same sense it is today, but essentially giving you priority in times of disaster. From a commercial network perspective, obviously we will have priority services as part of what we do from a commercial standpoint. I don't know that I would classify it as GETS in the traditional sense, if that answers your question.
But that begs the question, what do we do with 3,000 911 systems around the country and all the supporting, repeater sites and so forth?
Well, is that aimed at me?
Yep.
Okay. Well, many of those traditional 911 systems today are what I would call dedicated networks in part, at least from a Verizon standpoint. Essentially, they don't take advantage, if you will, of what we're doing from a commercial standpoint. So hardened, redundant, commercial-grade infrastructures that are totally dedicated to the needs of public safety. And so as you begin to transition those infrastructures, particularly to next-gen 911, where you'll begin to see a proliferation of video and data-intensive type applications, I think there will have to be a renewed interest on what we can do to secure and protect the interests of those 911 networks, much like we've done in the past.
But those systems of today are not going to go away. Land mobile radios
No.
are still going to be very much part of the whole scenario.
Still
right?
very much part of what we will do for many years to come.
Okay, good. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
4.9 gigahertz has been reserved on Wi-Fi for use for public safety. And we see, as a Wi-Fi vendor, we see kind of spotty usage of it. Some municipalities insist on having 4.9 available for first responders, others do not. I didn't see any mention of that in your presentation. I'm curious of your view on using 4.9 gigahertz Wi-Fi for public safety.
Certainly we don't shy away from, we embrace Wi-Fi should the municipality want to take advantage of it. We think it's an important augmentation of our commercial infrastructure. As a matter of fact, if you subscribe to our services today as a consumer, you'll see that we do invite many of our customers to take advantage of Wi-Fi deployments that are out there. So certainly as a part of public safety, we certainly embrace and support Wi-Fi infrastructures as they exist and as they begin to grow and materialize in the future.
What part of the country is Wi-Fi incorporated into their code or insist upon the Wi-Fi capability?
I don't know if it's in their code, but we see municipalities in New England, for example. We see
really?
Southern California. We see a wide variety of places.
Wow. Okay, I haven't seen that in the Mid-Atlantic yet.
We have not seen from a local enforcement, most of the provisions are around in-building radio for the portables. And so our premise at today's environment is that Wi-Fi should not be integrated on the DAS. We think Wi-Fi can be deployed at the same time as the DAS, and we think in the next generation of DAS, when everything is IP, that Wi-Fi will coexist in a more logical way. The challenge for somebody that owns a DAS that delivers Wi-Fi is the troubleshooting associated with unlicensed devices and unlicensed frequency essentially locks you into troubleshooting purgatory when you don't have any control. And in other words, on a DAS that's deployed for a cellular operator, you know the problem is either the base station, the DAS, or the handset. In an unlicensed, unmanaged world with Wi-Fi, sometimes you get caught in this loop where because the Wi-Fi is on the DAS, now you're responsible to troubleshoot Wi-Fi without any of the controls.
Tim?
My question's aimed at Alex for a little bit of guidance. Are you saying that public safety push-to-talk functionality will in the future be on LTE, or push-to-talk will still reside on the APCO standard?
Both. I think you'll see it transition to an LTE environment. It may not be classified as a PTT, we know it today, but I think it'll act and function in a very, very similar way. And, as long as 3G continues to exist, you'll see the traditional push-to-talk that are out there. Many of our first responder customers take advantage of our PTT offering today, so not going away anytime soon.
Okay, so LTE is going to be both push-to-talk as well as an application platform.
It may be an IP-based, kind of push-to-talk based application, but again, it'll function in a very similar manner.
Okay, thank you.
We have to wrap it up now, so we stay on schedule, but I'm sure our panelists will stay behind. If you have some more questions, you can come up here and talk to them.